And it was,
I'm sorry, I wanted to record because somebody asked us to record this. Yeah. Go ahead.
But it has just been a really fun opportunity, as pandemic has started to open up, to sort of make it a reality and to actually see people in person as opposed to spaces just like Zoom, which serve their purpose. But it also gives you the energy to take root and step forward. So I'll let you show some of the.
Right, but one of the keys here you started to say is that you and Laurel talked about this and you had some energy of Genesis together. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah, that's accountability, doing it.
And just to have the opportunity through the Icelandic National League US, we were taking courses. And I think what's really funny, Laurel and I have known each other for several years, but it took this trip so that we could actually meet in person. It's probably since high school for coming together, just because her family life has been different. Pandemic put a couple pauses into the world. I think Laura would agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just such a cool confluence of circumstances. And and then we met someone on the program too, that in this program of 20 people in Iceland, who's from Evanston too. This is so weird. But yeah, Alicia and I mean, I'm much older than she is, but her mother was my Girl Scout leader. Anyway, cool. I'll let Alicia take it away. I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
I just think that this is so key, that a lot of us try to do things alone. And if we're here tonight talking about living your dream, being inspired and motivated to do something, sometimes it's easier to do it with someone else. So,
This is the Poland, or the harbor around Ísafjörður. And what is just so incredible here was that the day was just perfect. There was no wind, and the reflections, and it sort of brings an energy, mid course time that we are there, where everything is just organic. And there are two of our classmates along the rocks. The young man on the right, Davíð, sort of plays an important role in this journey as well.
I have a big smile on my face because I know what's coming about him. This picture is just crazy. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, let me, there we go.
Yeah, now this young man his name is Davíð. And when I was working for the State Park Service in New Jersey, many years ago, this young man and his father come, and there becomes a friendship over the years. And so this was taken probably in about 2003, 2004. And this particular trip, we end up having an opportunity I've kept up with Davíð's father, and we had an opportunity to meet now as adults. So
Alicia, before you go on, Stephanie asked, I forgot to give some context about the program. What was the nature of the program that you were in?
Well, the nature of the program that I was in was a 3-week Icelandic immersion program at the High School of Vesterfjörður. And it gives you the opportunity to learn Icelandic in a group setting with people from all over the world. You have an opportunity. Some people have Icelandic heritage, like myself, Western Icelanders like Lauren and myself, people who are living, working, some people who are married to Icelanders, refugees who are coming, and there are younger programs for high school and younger to try to become involved, because Icelandic isn't the easiest of languages, but they're trying to make it more accessible, because there are some statistics that in the next few years, the immigration population is going to be rising.
In Iceland?
In Iceland, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and there'll be more on that to come as we
delve into it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see, hold on. There we go.
And this is Davíð now. And he spent a bit of time growing up in New Jersey. And once he returned to Iceland, he entered this program as well to help improve his Icelandic so that he could improve within his jobs. And there are other people who are in the program who are working in Iceland, and their unions help pay for this program to do on the European language scale A1, A2 level.
I absolutely love this. Going from that to this.
Yeah, and it just is such a neat transformation.
It's so amazing. All right, so go ahead. Now we'll move on to these maps.
This sort of gives you a sense of place in the West Fjords. The school is down on part of this little peninsula right underneath the Isafjorda. There's actually a small airport that is directly below this point. I didn't fly into the community. We drove from Reykjavik, which is about 5 hours away, but you're literally surrounded by water, surrounded by mountains, as you could see from the first picture.
Mm.
So I'll let you go to the next.
Yeah.
You know, this kind of gives you the point of departure for where we are in Iceland, where the green dot is. And also of note, I was with family who I had met after the program, and they took me to the spot where that green dot is represented and said, if you look south, the next continent that you see is Antarctica. And I just thought that's sort of really stunning to realize how small the globe is, you know, and how vast it is at the same time. Iceland is about the size of Ohio with about 300,000 people.
Mm. I can't see Judy right now because we're on share screen, but I'm sure Judy has a smile on her face because she's been to Antarctica, as we know.
Yeah.
And to Iceland as well.
And to Iceland, yep, exactly. Okay,
And
go ahead.
so this dot represents where we were within Iceland. Down below is the capital is marked. And so you are driving these really beautiful roads, getting to see and absorb the landscape. I was traveling with Davíð and his father, and we actually went camping for 3 weeks. So we had a vintage 1988 camper just because housing was at a premium, not only because of an increase in Ukrainian refugee population, but tourists have decided that the West Fjords were the place to be. And Laurel and I were we both came up with alternate housing arrangements. And I think we each had our own incredible experiences. Would you agree with that, Laura?
Absolutely.
Mm.
You know, it was the whole experience being in the West Fjords and studying together. It was more than what was happening within the classroom. It was the classroom came out into the community.
What is that? Is that a huge, massive body of water in Iceland?
Those are the glaciers.
Oh, they are the glaciers. I wondered that. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And this little dot represents Ariabaki, which is a small community where part of my family sort of had come from as well.
Mm.
So after the class, this is where I was able to spend a little bit of time exploring for a day.
That's so funny because my family came from there too. Anyway, I'll shut up now.
No, that's okay. Alicia, I don't know, did you say that in the beginning, that is what sparked your interest in Iceland?
Well, yes, that I probably did not complete all of that, but while I was at Mount Holyoke, I wrote papers and began studying about Icelandic culture and history, and had done a paper with a visiting professor for a European politics class about Iceland having one of the oldest social democracies and looking at the politics of what was happening in the community. It is actually the oldest social democracy.
Mm.
You know, and then as you get older and you start learning more about family, this is sort of the departure, leaving, coming and going, and just seeing the vastness of the skies.
And the color is crazy.
Yeah. This is myself and Davíð's father as we've been driving around the community. and it was sort of like a candid little selfie that just sparks the fact that I was able to travel with somebody from the community, who was more familiar. Ole is a realtor, and during the 3 weeks that we were in the West Fjords, he was taking his job literally on the road. So while we were in class, he was preparing things that we were going to do, but still conducting some of his business. And I think that's really the opportunity that has been changing so much in the last 2 to 3 years, is that your sense of place is where you are, and that's where you belong.
That's beautiful. I love, now that we've seen Davi as the boy and the man, and this is his father, even when we were doing this before, I loved, talking about the pictures. I loved that progression. I just love that. It's so personal and warm.
Yeah. When you come, this was my first day in Reykjavik when we were coming, and this is Harpa, this is their concert hall. And I've had the opportunity, this is my 3rd trip to Iceland, but early morning to have an opportunity to see this and see the quality of light reflected on glass and structure that has been made from Icelandic materials.
Yeah, I mean, it's like an art installation.
Yes, and it's sort of iridescent in the sunlight, and it reflects the atmospheric conditions in the glass. This is my first day, and Laurel may remember this too from when you arrived. This was the university setting, and it doesn't look like a very big campus. It's rather small, but again, they are looking to work with people to teach Icelandic in a setting where the community speaks Icelandic. Almost everyone speaks English. But the really fun part about this program is they want you to succeed in learning the language. Maybe not be such a stickler with the grammar, but to get out and feel comfortable speaking. And wouldn't you say that's correct, Laurel?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when you said university just now, you meant this university program. That's not a main university in Iceland, or is it?
It is a main university in Iceland.
Oh, it is. Okay.
It is the University of the West Fjords, and they have several master's programs as well as language programs, and they work with children during the summer as well to get kids who are new to the community to learn Icelandic so that they don't feel separate. It's a really inclusive program.
It's really something.
Yeah. This was our first walking tour of the community so that you had an orientation. And what I can say about weather is, if you don't like the weather in Iceland, wait 5 minutes, it's going to change. It might get worse, it might get better. But you sort of need a really good raincoat, good footwear so that you're not wet. I think Laurel and I were both spent quite a bit of time in our waterproof pants, and just addressing some of the wind issues. But it was for what was happening on the East Coast and back even in Chicago, where it was pushing over 100 degrees. The temperature here was moderate, maybe 40 degrees at night, 55 during the day. And you just had an opportunity to sort of absorb the language, even in the weather, I think. I mean, because in Iceland, the weather is news. Volcanoes were happening in the south. And that's one of the ways that you would learn to speak the language, is finding out a little bit about what's happening, listening to the community about what's happening with the weather. Wouldn't you say that's reasonable, Laurel?
Absolutely. And their vocabulary, I mean, they have words for, I don't know how many hundreds of different words to describe snow, because there's so much of it. And there's a special word that for light, for sunlight, like that first picture that Alicia showed, where the everything is reflecting into the water, and there are like vocabulary words that describe a glassiness of water that everything reflects. It's just like, it is kind of interesting. It's a lot of vocabulary to learn and a lot of grammar.
It's a whole cultural orientation.
And it's very much weather oriented, because weather is such a big thing there.
This is one of my classmates, and Abby and her husband Gunnar Abby is from Mexico, and she and her husband have been living internationally. These small children have the opportunity now where they are polyglots already at their age, Icelandic, Spanish, a little English, and they were just come from the Netherlands. And Abby was in this program so that she could actually be up to speed with her in-laws, her family, her kids, so that she could be a working member within the community. And she was so much fun to study with, because
Oh.
she already having multiple languages under her belt, and this is what she is calling home. I just admired what people brought to the program.
Also, I mean, and Judy, I think we talked about this a bit as well last week. It so highlights, Americans mostly speak English. We don't do immersion programs, language programs, and kind of, I spent a year in Israel. It's like, yeah, we'll speak English. Don't bother trying to speak Hebrew, So it's cool. Those kids are beautiful.
Well,
Yes.
and I mean, honestly, every time I've tried to use foreign language skills when I've been overseas or somewhere, people have preferred to speak in English because they want to practice their English.
They want to practice theirs. Yeah.
Okay.
And you've been to a lot of places, Stephanie.
But
Judy,
it depends on the place, to be sure, but that's what I've run into.
Right. I think it depends on where you are and also what your level of the foreign language is. Because I've always found, I speak French and I spent a year living in France, and I always found people were really appreciative of me speaking French.
Yeah.
They're also somewhat amazed that an American can speak French, but yeah. But I've never actually had anybody, start speaking English to me, though we did tell the story last week about the couple, I think, in Honfleur, where the waiter came over to the French people and started speaking to them in English. So that was a sort of an interesting situation. Anyway, I'll shut up.
Well, this particular sign, it looks a little blurry to right now. I thought it was a little clearer, but it's basically says Talsteide. It basically is so that you can, is your camping place. And so we were behind in this large field. I believe we have a photograph that shows the campground. And the community center was the gymnasium and the pool. So every day you'd get up, start your morning by going for a swim, spending time in the hot pots, the big hot tubs in the morning. And it's just how people learned how they relax, or what they call slappa off, which basically means you just chill. They work hard, they play hard. And once they realized that we were not just traveling through for a couple of days, you got to listen more to what they were saying. They talk about the weather, you talk about what's happening in world politics for a little bit, and they talk about, hey, what's so-and-so doing down the street? What's the news of the community? And as things were going into our third week, they're like, how's class?
It's like the baths. That used to be the baths. That's what they do, the baths. That's amazing. That's such an interesting wellness practice.
They literally have the opportunity. I think a good portion of Iceland, they're starting a 4-day work week nationally. They have the understanding of what it means to relax and what it means for mental health, especially since now at this time, when we were there were 23 hours of daylight, and going into where you're getting to more nighttime. This shows some of the currency and what's important to the economy, the fish.
I see that.
Maritime industry, 100 kroner is roughly about $1. I think for Laurel and I, we benefited because the dollar was really fairly strong at the time when we were there. And I think one of the tips that I learned that was really important if you're going to Iceland or potentially overseas, call your credit card company, tell them you're traveling.
Yeah.
Make sure that you do this, but use your credit card, because that actually handles the transaction fees much easier than running around to the bank. I was really surprised also for cell phone service. I had AT&T and I paid for the World Pass, and that made it extraordinarily easy, even for things to do transactions with Apple Pay. I was surprised that so much was digitally geared to have cashless currency. And that was a real surprise to me. I don't know if that worked for you too, Laurel.
It was the same. Yeah.
That's interesting.
You know, these are the shirts that Laurel and I had, that Jeg vil tala islensku. And when you had this, they said, I will speak Icelandic. And they also sent us around town with a little hang tag that we'll have. But when you have 20 of us walking around in shirts like that, they also know that we're not just here as part of the cruise economy. That
Tourists, yeah.
There were 2 to 3 large cruise ships a day that were coming through. A real surprise. And the sad thing for me watching this happen is that people aren't really engaging in the community around them. They're there, they're looking, but they're not taking in the sheer beauty of the landscape.
Well, we heard that from Judy last week, and that whole idea of really going into the culture where you are, which you're clearly doing. I love the visual of you sitting around in hot pots with people.
Yeah.
Right.
This was our camper. It got a little close sort of at some point at the for being able to actually do studies, but we were fortunate that the campground had an opportunity for a community room. And so we had opportunities to see other travelers, lots of people from the Netherlands, lots of people from Germany. There were probably 3 people at this program, other people who were camping, because housing was at such a premium. Laurel and I initially had been trying to get one of the guest houses, and it just wasn't available.
So let me get this straight. You and Davi and his father were in this camper?
Yes.
Together for those 3 weeks?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, we had a tent so that people were in and out. We weren't officially over, on top of each other all the time.
Right.
But we had enough, there was proper sleeping accommodation, and to be able to do this and having a kitchen. But basically the baths and the showers were right at the campground.
Right. So you were at the campground.
Yep. And because we were not in the camper all the time, it made it that much easier to sort of figure out, we were sort of a known quantity.
Yeah, how to navigate. Yeah, that's interesting. What's interesting to me about this, especially after Judy's talk last week, is sometimes the dream doesn't look the way you think it might look. I don't imagine that you thought, I'm going to hang out in a camper for 3 weeks, in the beginning when you were thinking about a cool house with Laurel or whatever guest house. So that's very interesting.
Yeah. And so as you're driving around with the camper to do things, this was at Bjolafjall, which is one of the lookouts. And it tells you, the sign up above says it gets to be windy. And really the other picture is, don't back up off the cliff while you're taking a selfie.
Oh my God.
And it's just a bit of a surprise because people don't always pay attention. What we think of for like OSHA safety standards, Iceland is basically reminding you, and you would say this is correct, Laurel, right? That you have to be paying attention and being alert to your surroundings.
It's
and that
crazy.
even goes for being on the roads.
Yeah, but it's also aimed, I think, at the dummy tourists.
Absolutely.
If you've ever done the Great Ocean Road in Australia, which I've done, every time you pull out of an overlook, there is a sign, and I have a picture of it, that basically says, we drive on the left here, in essence. And I found out that they had to put them up because, frankly, all of the Asian tourists were coming out and driving on the right.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a big problem in New Zealand as well.
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely. It's a problem anywhere where they drive on the left, but it was Great Ocean Road that I saw it. Yeah.
Yeah. And at least in Iceland, people do drive on the right side of the road, but there are some places where the roads are one lane, and they have these pullovers that they have a letter M. We never did find out what that M really stood for. But you literally, if you are going down the mountain, you pull into one of these M sections so that the vehicle coming up doesn't stall. And that's something that becomes more and more apparent, at least on this third trip, wasn't as much of a mystery as it was my first trip.
Well, of course you get used to things.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And this is the lookout over Bjolafjall with a NATO weather station, a huge cliff drop, but this walkout that you can look off to the left and look towards Greenland.
So
and I just
amazing.
think it's just stunning as you can look across fjords, see other mountains, see the landscape. And for me, just having imagined what it would have been like for our families, those of us that are considered Western Icelanders, whose families left Iceland, either still have family there or other relatives who returned, but the Iceland connection here. So I'll let you. In this community, Flattery, there was a young woman who was an artist, and she was painting these lovely floral paintings. She had been a singer, but had suffered 3 to 4 strokes. And in this image, she had created by using straws to blow the color and the pigment. And for this, she's like, this is my new song. And how to be able to gather in a little community and host an exhibit that people from all around the fjords were coming to. And it was just really lovely.
How old is she?
I want to say she's in her 30s.
Wow. Is she the one who wrote the books you were telling me about?
No.
Oh, that was somebody else. Okay.
Yeah.
That's beautiful and amazing what people can. Oh.
And this is the young woman. She's the artist, and she was with her family. And probably about 30 people come out to be able to see what's been happening. She works has an artist assistant who was helping her select colors, but she was choosing like the bouquets, like doing a still life, and those were representative of local landscape. And just to be able to find your voice when it's been taken from you.
Wow, that's stunning.
Yeah. These are some of the tunnels that we would get to see. This was the first tunnel in Iceland. I don't remember its official name, but groups of men would work with picks, shovels, and dynamite on these. Now they have much more formal equipment that does these tunnels. But they knew that in order to get around the mountains, sometimes going through was easier. And I just thought this was sort of a light at the end of the tunnel image.
It's interesting to think who those original early workers were on the tunnels, a lot of them who built the bridges and the tunnels, and, they were a lower socioeconomic class or whatever. So it's interesting to think who might have been the workers on these old tunnels.
Well, on the initial ones, they're actually Icelanders. So it's not a different socioeconomic class. They're the ones that are the engineers. And the workers. So you had somebody, the Laurel and I think had talked, I think there's another picture that might have a sign, but it had a word for like the explosion expert. And this was at John Sigurdsson's house. He was the first president of Iceland, and looking across the fjord. Churches are really interesting since the communities were originally pagan. And at the time that Christianity comes in almost 800 years ago, you have the opportunity where people are like, it's okay, we'll transition to the new communities, but pastors would travel from community to community. So church isn't always held every week.
Because the pastors were traveling.
Yes.
Was that it looks like a small size building, but maybe it's just far away.
It's a small size building. It's really done for the communities. And one of the other things that we had seen as you look, churchyards or church gardens are not there. Some are affiliated with the churches, but others, when there are shipwrecks, those are closer to the shore. And so you get to see the sort of the dichotomy of how you do memorials.
Well, the whole zeitgeist of being, on the water, surrounded by the water is, part of the world there.
Exactly. And this shows the West Fjords, the local museum, to be able to come into community and just to explore. It was originally built by the Danes because Iceland really gained their independence in the 1940s. And the Danish merchants were the ones, those would have been considered more of the upper class at that point because they had the money coming to and from the area. But this is one side of the Easterfjordur where we were.
Mm. Both the water and the fjords.
Yes.
It's like a whole, it's what life is about there.
And since we were doing not only learning language, but you were learning about food and foodways, one of the staff was teaching everybody how to make the Icelandic pannukakkur, the pancakes. Even from my Swedish side of the family, I was not always adept at this, but you get these special pans. You have the opportunity to create a batter that's just runny enough, put it on the pans, you work at it just like when we were maybe making pancakes as a kid, but they're so thin. And
they're like
so
crepes.
delicate. Like a crepe, yes.
Like crepes. Stephanie's nodding her head. She's got experience with this. Mm-hmm.
And this was just really nice to be able to work again with teams. I mean, the course was initially started in English and sort of migrates more to Icelandic. So we had fellow students who were probably about 5 of us from America. You had maybe 5 Germans, 2 Japanese people, and 2 people from Mexico. And the list, if I'm forgetting anyone else, Laurel, with several people who are living in the other Nordic countries, learning and doing business. So you're having the opportunity for a very organic and dynamic learning experience.
That's so great. Stephanie, you were going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, we used to call them Daddy's pancakes. Used to make crepes on Saturday morning every now and then.
Nice.
Yeah. So, I thought this was going to be the next picture because I'm like, I'm hungry. I didn't eat dinner yet.
Yeah.
That
And in
looks
this case,
really
you
damn
take
good.
them, you either fill them with like a cinnamon sugar or you use a jam. Sometimes it has rhubarb. We didn't have the rhubarb that day. I believe this is like a raspberry. And then you fold it and you fold it again, and they just look, or roll them, and they're just decadent. They
So
remind you
it's like an egg it's like an egg batter, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm totally making those. They look so damn good. Yeah. They're there again.
So that shows you the different ways that you could do that. And it was like, wow, we even have like a kind of like a teachable moment, whether or not you're learning phrases. I have to go back into our learning materials because all of our recipes were in Icelandic to try to sit and follow them.
I mean, it's M&C's when you have 3 pictures of pancakes.
That's right.
Yeah.
This is the town center, and during the time that we were there, it was Pride Month, and they have just tried to make things so inclusive. On the far right, you can see a little red, you've got a little red mark. The post office was sort of off in that direction. You have banks, you have bookstores, and everything that you need to have community that is open and just reminding people to be kind.
Wow. So on the far right, that building with the red logo on it has a pride flag. That's a post office? That's flying.
That's a government building.
A government building flying a pride flag.
Yes.
Wow. That's amazing. And that walkway, that's ridiculous. That's gorgeous.
We were in a couple of places where they were just installing these, but that little red symbol shows that there's a mailbox there.
I see.
This is looking off from our campground and what you would see, and in early evening, and just watching the clouds roll in. It just reminded me as what little of night you would get, how these are the same places. The cloud, the sky, the celestial beings up above have been the same for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Mm. So is that your camper on the right there?
Yes.
And that's what you looked out at? Yeah. And you
Yeah.
said it was 23 hours of light?
For the initial portion, yes.
Yeah. Wow.
And these are the hang tags that Laurel and I would have to wear. The class would send us out in small groups to go out into the community, and Jeg tala bara Islensku basically says, I just speak Icelandic. And this was the cue for the people in the town at the local businesses, that they wouldn't speak English to us unless you
So-
got really stuck. This is
So
what
this program, it's like every year or something? It's like a repeating program for people who sign up?
absolutely.
So the Icelanders are like, oh, here comes the red tag people, the red yarn people, right? They're like,
You know,
oh, here
that's
we go.
I think that's part of it, but I think they're really proud of the national language. You know, they have their currency. They're not in the EU. They still have the kroner. So
Mm.
euros are a currency that can be purchased there, and used simultaneously. But people use the krona,
Mm.
and you have people a slightly different regional dialect of Isafjorda, Icelandic, and people were proud to speak Icelandic. It's only been in the last few years, I think, that it's become such a hot spot for tourists.
Mm.
But this is a program where the university, which does a lot of distance learning and a lot of work within climate change and coastal communities, that they need people to be engaged. And for there are two programs, one that you could take from around the States in the program, and another that is taught there in Icelandic to address the fact that you have fisheries. How do we work with rising waters in these towns in Greenland, whether or not it's in the sections of the West Fjords? And it was just fascinating to have an opportunity to be engaging with those students and
Mm.
staff at the institution.
It's amazing. Go ahead.
Yeah, in this location, this was a little museum, Skrimsaletur, and it was the Sea Monster Museum. And so all sorts of places around the world have sea monsters. Iceland is known for quite a few sea monsters that are around the area, or myths of things that come out of the water, come out of the marsh. And it's just really kind of fun to see how little communities that may have 2 to 3 streets, wouldn't you say, even like when we were in Suðurí, or Thiggery, that the roads wrap around. There's really one main road that goes around Iceland because there's too much work on the interior. You have sheep roads. You know, we have deer here in America, but there are sheep, that 800,000 sheep in Iceland, which is roughly 2.5 times the population of people.
Mm.
And they're free range up until about now, where they're gathering them in out of the mountains.
I mean, how old is it there? Like I'm torn between it's kind of like not really that old versus, oh, it is really old.
I think that you have communities that have been there since the Vikings, since the 800s.
Hmm.
And there are archaeological sites that are there, but then you have a very modern and forward-looking community where Reykjavik is the capital of Iceland, and in the north you have Akureyri, which is, they consider the capital of the north, and a series of institutions along the way that are stopping points.
Mm. It's extraordinary, and it's also beautiful. If anybody
Yeah.
else has any questions, go ahead. I'm just asking away. Oh, is that the same? Oh, go ahead. There you go.
This was in a little community called Billardollar, and an artist who was a hermit lived here, and he was doing, many years ago, he was doing these concrete figures. And just fascinating to see that it's now becoming a national treasure.
Hmm.
And people are renovating his little home, looking out. He didn't go very far, but he just created, so people who are poets, people who are writers, and then the artists working within their landscape, because oral tradition was what was done for so many years, even when you talk about the Icelandic sagas.
I pretty much stopped listening after you said he just went out and created.
Yeah,
Because that's so beautiful and amazing. And in my work, it's the deepest yearning that most people I work with have. There is something what to create in them, but they think it has to be a way, or it has to be a way, it has to be, a way that's right. But when you said he just went out there and created, that's what you're talking about here.
exactly. And you're working within the landscape. And even Roseanne, who's on the program, had sent to me when I arrived, I had a book, Independent People by Haldor Laxness, which talks about what it means to be your own independent person. And a story, it's always a little complicated as a read. That for me, it's easier to read because I have a better understanding of the landscape, if that makes sense.
Interesting. Oh, there's the
And this
another
shows more of
view.
his community
Mhm.
about how he created these shapes and architecture.
It's so beautiful. It's very sparse. Everything's very
Yeah.
sparse, very sparse. There they are.
There are some of the sheep right by the side of the road.
It's like Ireland, with the cows. When
Yeah.
you're driving on the little tiny roads and you stop because the sheep or the cows are crossing.
And
Wow.
again, this is another view with David looking out, as we pulled off by the side of the road. You don't have guardrails. I think that was really one of the things that was such a surprise.
Well, how deep is that right there? That water? Is that like deep?
I would say once you get out in the middle, it's navigable.
Yeah.
So the fishing boats are going out, the whaling boats to be able to do whale watches. And in some places, the cruise ships are coming in, or they're ferrying their visitors on smaller boats going out. Laurel, maybe you have an idea of what this is looking from the campground back to where the pools were. So they have a water slide, and literally the community comes and gathers there. So if you were around at the pool on the weekend, you would see all of this communities, Bolongervik, where we were staying. Everybody is gathering. Basketball, football, as in soccer, and just weight rooms, just having an opportunity to gather and see what happens. It's such an integral part of the community town.
Well, it's so antithetical, or that's not really the word. It's so opposite of this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so opposite of, I had this impression of people in their homes, with the electronics, the phone, the laptop, watching the TVs, binging on Netflix, becoming disassociated, disconnected. People tell me it's hard for me to go out. I have a lot of people tell me this. That's one of the reasons they hire me. Like, I feel like it's hard now. But all of this that you're talking about is community. It's very beautiful.
And I think for me, the real shift was at home, we have a television.
Yeah.
It's on, you watch the news. It may go on from world news going on to even up to evening till you watch the 10 o'clock news. And this was a month really out of an official television to be around during the day because you didn't have one in the camper.
Yeah.
You might catch some of the news, when you were at a community space to see what was happening with the volcano. Another really great learning experience that the university offered at nights, we would gather in a more informal setting and watch movies which were filmed within the West Fjords. So now you're watching Icelandic language films here and then having informal discussions to get back into the moment. And the opportunity to start your day here from the campground in the community got your mind into the different language. That's sort of how you'd flip the opportunity so that you'd be ready to at least speak. You needed the coffee.
Yeah. And Judy and Stephanie and Laurel, did you have that? Do you have these experiences when you travel about, not being consumed into the electronics? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I just came back a little while ago from 3 weeks on safari in Tanzania, and when you're staying in game parks and so on, certainly you don't have TVs and so on. I do find that after a certain amount of time, the politics of today is such that I start getting withdrawal if I can't see my, if I can't get access to CNN or whatever international news thing
Interesting.
is available. But yeah, I mean, I've been to lots of places where you gotta kind of sign off and not sign back on again until you come home.
Yeah, who was it who said something about the hotels? Oh, Roseanne is saying most of the hotels don't even have TVs in the room. Yeah. Yeah. It's a whole thing.
One of the real challenges that we had during the course of the week, we went away one weekend and we came back and the whole school was painted. So the
That
whole
white
facade,
school from before? Oh my
yes. And so we were
gosh.
watching the transition of everything here, and these are some of the classmates. So we were all late the following day just because it was after a weekend, and we were teasing the instructors that we couldn't find the building. It's not white anymore.
Oh my gosh, that's so amazing that's the same building from the other
Yeah.
thing. I noted, obviously didn't comment, but wasn't necessary, but I noted that it was not in the best repair. And I wondered about that, but obviously it was being prepped.
It was all being prepped. And
Yeah.
I think the real hard thing for Laurel and I watching this was you have these painters who are here in their fancy Icelandic sweaters that are just covered in all sorts of paint. And you're like,
Oh gosh.
oh no. But it's what they live. They're their tools.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a little bit of a student of, I observe design and color ever since I read Daniel Pink's book, The Right Brain Will Rule the World,
Yeah.
or The Right Brain Rules the World or something. So that's quite a color that was selected of the entire color scheme. Is blue the color of Iceland on the flag?
Blue is one of the colors, blue, red, and white.
Oh, okay. So maybe that, but that's beautiful. That's amazing. That's really, that's cool.
Now, we had gone to a theater performance down in a community called Thingery. There's a little tiny theater. It couldn't have been more than holds maybe 75 people. And this gentleman, whose name I can't recall, is absolutely hysterical. He does a whole performance of Gisli Saga all by himself and these little wooden puppets. He has to be like the Icelandic Robin Williams, and he was going to do this performance for us in Icelandic, but there were enough people coming from another program for just the 1 week that he was flipping between English and Icelandic. And one of the things that I will now do is actually read the Gisli Saga now that we sort of have the family tree in order.
And once again, I'm pretty sure there's nothing more low tech than what I'm looking at there.
Yeah.
It's not like laser and screens and, that's really funny.
And he's taking this trip, taking trips around Iceland, going to the community schools to teach the kids the relevance of their history through the sagas. And everyone had told him that it wouldn't be done. Laurel, you had spoken with his wife. Is there anything that you would like to add to this?
I think that mostly that they want to keep the sagas alive, and it's hard for small children to read those. They're I think even if you know the language, they're hard to. It's thick, and he was just determined to come up with a way that could communicate the basics of these stories to children. And I mean, this guy was so entertaining. Like, I think the Icelandic Robin Williams is a perfect way to describe him. And he's got so much energy. But no, I don't. His wife is an artist. I mean, Iceland really prides themselves on their itself on its art and music, and your theater too. But I think of art and music, and they're just you literally do not meet a family where there isn't someone who does something with their hands either a musical instrument or some type of art, and they're just very resourceful and very simple. I think it's very simple. Like Susan said, there's no laser lights here. It's just basic living. And I think the elements, the landscape and the weather sort of makes you sort of, well, you know what, we can't really do a lot in the winter, so we sort of huddle up and knit sweaters and
create.
talk and
Yeah.
jump into hot pots. Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's really it's a very simple life. That's what I really enjoy. I went off the topic a little bit there, but this was a fabulous play that a lot of people that he's making possible all over the country, traveling around with a suitcase, I think, with all of his props inside.
You know, and I think the other portion, their literacy level is so great that there's a better understanding. And when they don't understand something, that's when you get fear. And in this case, they are so open. And the fact that so many of the Icelanders are multilingual in Icelandic, Danish, English, other Nordic language, German. Only one of our project managers has Croatian under his belt because his wife is Croatian. And again, this is looking off at the sunset, over at the sunset towards Greenland from Bjolafjall. And it's just this amazing drop off when you look down the hill.
It's almost hard to get
And
definite
Alicia,
pictures.
What's
Alicia,
that?
sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
I was going to say, if that sunset in 23 hours of daylight, that was what, like 11 p.m. or something?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you just have a very different sense of the world around you when you realize that just off to the left of that is Greenland. And that if the weather had been a little more cooperative, we might have been able to see one of the tall mountains in Greenland and just realized how close you are, but you know, within the Arctic Circle.
Absolutely beautiful. There it is again, the sun
Yeah.
setting.
And
11
it gives you an
p.m.
idea of the drop. You can see people who are in another section walking along a path, and those are little people sticking up. It's not trees.
Oh,
And this is my friend Oli had taken me here and said, this is the opportunity for you to be able just to sort of see one of the furthest points north within Iceland.
so such a great story.
Probably my personal accomplishment was I needed a haircut while I was here, and Guthlaug was able to give me my haircut. And I think she was a little intrigued that we found her salon. And between doing kind of like a mix between Icelandic and English to make sure that we were getting it right, I think I got a fabulous haircut. And she's like, come back next year.
Oh, that's awesome. Supporting a woman-owned business.
Yeah. And again, looking off across the waters to the other sides of the fjords. And just the way the quality of light. Laurel and I each received these certificates that said that we had completed over 90 hours of language study. And our Canary, or our teacher, and you're basically your director of the program coming in and spending time with us, a really informal gathering of students, but really, really just lovely. You know, it gives you a sense of accomplishment to have been able to do that. And I think that's when you can sort of get a chance, at least for myself and probably for Laurel and other classmates. This was an in-person activity where you're not just doing one-on-one. You have every day your breaks, your lunch breaks, your afternoon break, and then an evening gathering. And so you're getting to know people. It probably took about a week once I came home to get used to the fact that
They weren't there.
they weren't there.
Oh,
Alicia, how many hours a day did you have classes?
Weekends were free. Mondays through Fridays, you would work from 9 o'clock till about 10 o'clock, you have a 15-minute break. You go to a little bit beyond noon. Would convene again at 1:30 and then go until about 4.
Okay.
And then we would gather again after dinner for some of the evening activities. And a few activities that we had were field trips into the community and the surrounding area, and those lasted a little longer.
Mhm.
And this was our whole group together. The tall guy in the back was our other person from Evanston, where Laurel and I grew up, and he's a German man working in consulting there. And our group of teachers, a couple students were not here at the time, but just the varied backgrounds about how people were, what they were doing with their languages. So I think one of the youngest people was like 19, 20, and he was doing a language study class for his college. Another woman is from Northern Ireland, and she's an illustrator, and she was getting ready to do a journey to go into Eastern Europe, learning all of this, and people doing GIS studies, climate studies. So one gentleman was a CEO from England, and he's in a yogurt business. So he's working on making Icelandic skyr, and just having the varied age ranges of about 40 years just brought an awful lot of experience. And maybe, Laurel, would you think that's a fair assessment? It just had a really nice
Yeah.
blending.
Yeah, a couple of well, Tim is a physics professor at the University of Michigan, and Maggie from Germany is a special ed or sort of occupational therapist, and I think she just wanted to do her internship in another country. And then the tall, cute blonde woman off to the right is she's a horse trainer from Germany.
Yeah.
She's 19 years old, and she wants to teach people how to ride Icelandic horses and train Icelandic horses, which I guess are very different from other countries' horses. Just an amazing smattering of people, and for reasons for being there. But it came together very nicely, like Alicia said, that we just got very close to each other and kind of learned where I was a music teacher from Scotland, and just a really amazing array of people, but we all had this in common, that we wanted to learn this dang language.
And you to be able to work with teams, even where you would be shown a movie and then we'd have to write the alternate endings, or having like a Pictionary type description, but you could only use Icelandic words, and just really fun. And there was this is Oli and one of his 5 kids.
Oh.
His kids were with him all the time, and I think that was the real surprise this particular trip, because we are in the community. This little one was around the university all the time, getting a chance to meet us and gather together. So just before we graduated the program, one of the local restaurants and breweries was a venue, so that we had something called Speed Icelandic, and it worked on the platform of like speed dating, so that there were probably 10 to 12 tables, people from the community, some of whom we had met before, others we had not, but you had to literally go around the circuit maybe once or twice and introduce yourself, find out what they had done. And that's where the stage fright really sort of fell away once you got through the first 3 people. Wouldn't you say that's a reasonable assessment, Laurel? And these are our instructors.
Very good assessment.
Oli is one of the project coordinators for this program. The man on the right, Peter Weiss, is the director, and Eki Sturla he's an Icelander who's teaching, comes in from Reykjavik, and then Mark, who's the plaid shirt, he was the Danish Icelandic grammatician, who is just trying to work with idiom, making sure that you can understand the regionalisms, about what makes language different. Much the way that here in the States, maybe New York sounds different than southern US or the West Coast. Super fun. This is looking on the interior of the courtyard.
Ah,
And down below, they were having discussions about Viking arts, for how you fight, what do you do, and even sharing a practice called glima, which is sort of a contest. It's sort of a national sport of Iceland that is specifically Icelandic. But just tremendous getting a chance to spend time outside, and letting as much light into the community spaces.
and the fjord in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah, always, always there.
And this is Laurel, and Laurel, I stuck you in my presentation.
That's so
Wow,
great.
thanks.
This was really the funniest thing. The day that were preparing to leave, we were in a local cafe, and this woman comes up to me and says, "Are you Alicia Bjornson?" And it says you need my Wi-Fi password. And I'm listening to her voice. It sounds familiar. But this is Bertna, and she is from Reykjavik, and she was Laurel and my Icelandic professor. And we knew that I wouldn't see her when I would be in Reykjavik because she said she was away, but she was in the next fjord over. And we had the opportunity. She had come in to spend time with a friend, and we just happened to have been there the same time. And it just took about 5-10 minutes for the recollection, but we were in each other's iPhone contacts, and our phones connected us. And if we had been at a different location at a different time, we never would have passed.
Now that's where technology does apply.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's where
exactly,
technology
Susan.
does come in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just was really fun to have a chance. This is the night before we're getting ready to leave Bolungarvik,
Oh.
and you can get an idea of the surf.
Wow.
We're at a community where, looking out, probably one of the worst sea accidents had occurred during World War II, where a civilian convoy was traveling and they hit a minefield that was intended for the Germans. And there is a monument dedicated here to this, looking at what the surf would have been. But it gives you an idea of the scale of the community and just how walkable the whole community was. And this little section that we were, even Isafjordur was really very walkable.
Was that like really windy right there with that creating
Yes.
that surf? Yeah, that's
Yes.
kind of threatening.
Yeah, a kind of ominous in the mix.
Ominous. Yeah, ominous. Yeah. There's the camper.
Yep.
The trusty camper. It's like the camper's a player in the story.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And this is looking at the harbor at night and the fishing vessels that come in various sizes, for the communities. And you could see some of the activity either as they had just come in or were preparing to go out. But being able to come into safe harbor and safe home really is just incredible.
From the big, vast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is the view of how the campground looks, from a panoramic view, to give you an idea of people coming from all over, whether or not they've rented campers or they've got their tents, or the cyclists and motorcyclists who had come. Iceland is a community that needs the fish to survive on a national level. And in Isafjordur is a company called Kerecis that is taking the byproduct of, once the fillets are made, they take the skin and they make it medical grade. And it's just changing and revolutionizing wound care. And it's coming from this little community where people have figured out that everything is viable. Icelanders don't waste a lot.
Right.
And they're, from a sustainability standpoint, whether or not you're looking at the geothermal or whether or not you're looking at how electricity is generated with the water, it's just remarkable.
Well, there's a lot of brain power going on because it's not getting sucked into electronics.
Exactly.
I love it. You're probably right, Susan.
Yeah.
Seriously.
So this kind of
Brilliant.
concludes part of what was happening. This is Bjorn Gudnason, and he is my great-great-grandfather. And he had left Iceland around 1900 and goes to Canada and settles there. But he missed, after losing his spouse, he misses his Iceland so much, he returns. And I was able to visit his grave just before I left
Oh my gosh.
Iceland, and was able to find it. And so
How
when I
long-
arrived home, this photograph was waiting for me because I couldn't find it before I left. And it sort
Oh.
of completed the link.
He looks
Wow.
like an Icelander.
Yeah.
He does.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Where is he buried?
He's buried in Calfaturin Cemetery. As you go down towards Wogar and Keflavik.
Such a
And I
great,
think
that's
we
such a
had, did
great
we have a
picture.
photograph of? Oh, this is the whole crew that we had sort of been traveling with as we're preparing to leave. Another family member, Gary, who had also been living in the States, had come back, and he came in to sort of say hi.
Mm.
You know, I think that the real hard part is goodbyes are never really easy, but as I was preparing to leave, you can go to the next image, which just sort of sums up how I was feeling about, this is what the whole trip. It says, I wish this vacation would never
Oh.
end. And you go, yes, but then it wouldn't be a vacation. And it was just long enough to be able to sort of absorb what you needed to rest and restore and stretch the brain. And I just think, you know, it helps this type of experience, as Judy knows, Maren knows, Laurel, that this gives us an opportunity just to be better citizens of the planet.
Mm. Something I know you're devoted to. I mean, the experience, at one point I typed in the chat, I feel like I'm on the trip, you know. I feel like I'm on the trip with you. I mean, it's so extraordinary. Would you, if you were going to speak to someone who had a dream and really never could imagine how they could do it, would you encourage them to?
I think that it is just so important to start to plan, even plot your opportunities, and start writing down what your goal is and figuring out how this could look.
Mm.
Because I think for me and Laurel, we just ended up buying the tickets and said, let's figure the rest out.
Ah, sometimes you go there and then look back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was a thread that we were talking about on the Mount Holyoke group about how in the Mount Holyoke Club of Philadelphia had done a workshop that with working with Myers-Briggs test, and they divided people up by their personalities. And one group couldn't figure out who the travel agent was. I was probably in the group that just showed up, and everybody else, you know, had the opportunity to sort of figure out, you know, that there is a plan. You know, and I just really hope that for those that want to try, whether or not it's travel, it's the opportunity, even if it's like writing something down, just make a point to do something daily.
Mm. I think it's so wonderful. Thank you so much for coming here and sharing this. And thank you everyone for coming. A couple of people have had to leave. I know it's late on the East Coast for sure. But I think this is fun. I think it's amazing. Iceland is not on my bucket list per se. Greece, on the other hand, you know, but honestly, I mean it, every word that I say when I've been watching you, you know, I knew you were going, we were in touch before you were going. And then I'm like, when are you going? And then you told me the itinerary, and then you're back. Now you're back. I see the pictures. It's inspiring and motivating. So good job, Alicia and Laurel.
Well, thank you. You know, I think for how our community here in the States, within the Icelandic community that we were studying with, gave us the sort of the foundation to take the loop, you know, and jump right into the project. And for working with you from the accountability standpoint, just to say, check in, can you do this?
Exactly. Accountability is everything. So yeah, I'm so glad. All right, friends. Well, people are signing off. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Alicia, thank you so much for doing this, for coming, for sharing your experience. It's so really motivating. And I think, talking about it in the group, I think we're going to see other people who are inspired. I really, truly do.
Well, thank you. I hope that works that way. Laurel, thanks for coming.
So glad